Okay, so everyone, I'm kind of going to build the assignment here in front of you. So what I'm going to start with is by click Adobe Animate down here. And after it loads up, it's going to prompt me on this screen that will always come up unless you click Don't Show Again, to really create a new document. It'll give you all these different choices to create a new. If you select ActionScript 3.0, again, it's a little bit harder to read on the screen, but that's where ActionScript 3.0 is located. And you'll get a standard size canvas here. One of the main panels that you'll want to work out of here is not this library panel that it defaults to, but properties. This properties panel will give you FPS here, which actually means frames per second. So this this program, of course, is based on frame by frame animation rather than time-based animation. So there's a difference between those two. After Effects is based on a time, to where you say object go from point A to point B within 2 seconds, 3 seconds, whatever definition of time you give it, and that's what will happen. In Animate, it's going to base your animations on frames. So the way to measure time in this program is to understand that you have 24 frames per second. You have however many frames per second you set here in the properties palette. And so essentially you have to do the math. If I have 10 frames per second, then for every 60 frames in my animation here, I will have 6 seconds. So it's a little bit of a, I won't say backwards way, it's more of a basic way of animating rather than a little bit of a more complex way in time-based animation. It sounds more complex, but it's actually simpler in here rather than in the time-based stuff. The only more complexity about it in Animate is that it's based on frames and the whole time aspect. So 10 frames per second is a little bit low for having an image run across the screen really smoothly. The lowest you want to go is 12. 12 frames per second will give you a decently smooth animation on the screen without having it look more like a flipbook. And the benefit of that is file size. So if you imagine a file with 12 frames, rather than 12 frames for every second of the video being played, rather than a file size that's twice that amount with 24 frames for every second that it plays, that's where you get the benefit of having less frames per second. You sacrifice a little bit of the quality of the smoothness, but you actually have a better, smaller file size at the end. Sometimes that's a compromise that you have to make if you're dealing with a third-party vendor where you're hosting your artwork to advertise a product on a site, because a lot of times they will give you file size parameters. You can't go over a certain X amount of file size if you want to advertise on this site, etc., etc. Is that kind of making sense so far? Okay. So I'm going to start with 12 frames per second. Yeah, I'll actually boost it up to like 15. And here is also in the properties palette where you can adjust the size of your canvas here. So by virtue of the assignment here, I'm just requiring that you put your ads at 500 by 500 pixels. This little link icon here, it's between these two height and width variables that you can kind of click and drag, or you can click and just type your pixel dimensions there. That's going to constrain the proportion. So say like I wanted it to be 500 wide by 700 pixels tall, and I hit enter. I'll make it kind of more obvious, like 800. And then I wanted to constrain the proportions. I wanted to resize this, but keep the proportions of a little bit wider or a little bit taller than wider. I could hit this little link here in between and just kind of nudge this canvas up or down. I'm holding the shift button so I can go up by 10 or down by 10 increments of pixels, and then adjust the size that way. So much easier than adjusting the size in Photoshop, if you will. Unclicking that link, of course, I can make this 3 pixels wide by like 80 pixels tall, and my proportions are going to adjust based on whatever width and height I define here. So I'll go back to 500, 500. Just want to demo that piece. That's essentially a really good overview of what's in the properties palette. It's going to give you those main features there. I can use shortcuts here in Animate like I would any other Adobe program. A lot of them cross over. I'm just going to save this to my desktop really quick. So if I hold Command and press the plus or minus sign, I can zoom in or out. If I hit Command Spacebar, I can get my magnifying glass here and kind of zoom in on an area of the canvas. Let's see. The strange thing about Animate is that they're going to put all of your toolbars on the right side for some reason, which can get kind of confusing. You can actually move this over to the left if you feel more comfortable that way. So it looks more like a Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign kind of tool panel. But you get all of the different tools here, a selection tool, sub-selection tool, what they're calling. It looks just like the direct selection tool, but this tool has a unique attributes to it that are a little bit different from what your direct selection tool would be in Photoshop and InDesign, and so on. You have an Illustrator. You have the lasso, polygon, and all these tools as well, text, shapes, etc. So just kind of is very similar, which is nice to all other Adobe programs. You have a color palette here. You can kind of use these different areas to change colors. So the difference between Animate and I guess maybe like the simpler aspect of it is that it's based on RGB color rather than CMYK color. So of course none of this stuff is going to be printed. So they're not even going to deal with any CMYK color at all in here. And then to change a color, you can simply just slide the R, G, or the B values here, or you can just kind of type in numerals that you got from your Photoshop or brand standards document that maybe the brand that you're working on specifies RGB values, like McDonald's red or something like that, or Burger King blue. They'll all have RGB values for all of their corporate colors and stuff, and so you can either slide these sliders or just actually type those exact colors in. A here, what's interesting is A means alpha. Alpha is something that comes up in Animate as you'll see a little bit later on. Alpha really means opacity. So it's just another name for transparency or opacity in other programs like Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign. There's also a swatches area. All of this stuff will look very familiar. Create new swatch, is just basically what it sounds like. It's just an area where you can create a new swatch out of a color that you define here in the solid color area. Let's see what else. These align tools, again, you'll see all of these in InDesign and Illustrator. These will probably come in handy later on as you're building things out. So this is kind of essentially the gist of this area here. The library is another area that we're going to kind of touch on after we go through the basics of how animation works and how the basic drawing tools are going to work. But say, for instance, you want to animate a like a fish or something, or like just a JPEG. Let's just say you want to animate a JPEG. You would just import your JPEG into this library, you know, and then you would just drag these out onto this area, which is called the stage. And you would drag these elements out on the stage, and from there you could start animating them within the software. But the library piece we'll go over later as we start importing JPEGs. But today is just really a high-level overview of animating in general. Probably the most important, the place you'll spend more of your time is the timeline here. This is the area that you're going to actually draw objects on and animate objects within. So you can see these numbers here. It just goes on and on. So, and I'm just kind of side scrolling my mouse here. It's going to go, you can define it as for as many frames as you'd like in here. Let me see where I can do that. Pixel. So as you build things, you can actually extend this animation as far out as you really want. But the layers are just going to kind of work the same as anything else. I'm just going to do a simple animation just to show. This is going to be a circle. And now here, what it's saying really is I'm on layer circle, and I'm on frame 1. This little red hatch mark here, it just shows you where the playhead is at what frame or what point in time on this animation timeline. So I only have this whole animation is only 1 frame long because I don't have anything on it. So it's only going to default to frame 1 on layer 1 in this animation. So what I can do is then select a drawing tool, and then I'm going to, I'm just selecting the oval, and I'm just going to drag onto the canvas. I'm not hitting shift right now, so it's kind of changing into an oval, whatever kind of oval shape you know you want. This is exactly how it would work in Illustrator. So if I would hold the shift key, I could constrain the proportions and just make a perfect circle. So the difference about these objects in Animate than they are in Illustrator is they almost work like clay. Is a good way to describe them. If I click this object, I can move it around, but you can see it has these like dots inside of it. So what that really means is that if I took my sub-selection tool here, I could like select a piece of it, and I can both manipulate it as a vector object, but then also as a raster object. So the sub-selection tool, I can grab like some of these points and paths around the circle and manipulate it like I would any other piece of vector art. But if I take this other selection tool and then click and drag outside of it, I can select like a piece of it, almost like a piece of clay, and I can move that piece or delete it or something like that. So it's really strange how this kind of works. that's essentially the gist of some of these drawing tools. Like the same with this, like if it kind of acts like if it was in like a Photoshop raster file here as well. It's kind of a merge of both as far as the drawing tools are concerned. So I have this lasso tool, and I could kind of take a shape out of this shape and just knock it out, or just move it out, something like that. There's a reason why someone might want to do that, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Very seldom, though, would you ever want to do something like that. For me, anyways. I mean, I don't know if you would find any value in that. You probably would. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this shape, and I'm going to control click it. And then I can, this is kind of where the first step you kind of take before you start animating this thing with basic animation properties that this has. So you can go down to convert to symbol. This is where all of your, I won't say all of them, 99% of the time your drawing tools, whatever shapes you draw on the board, your next step will be to convert it to a symbol if you want to start animating it. In this screen, and we'll probably see this a lot, if you don't convert your stuff to a symbol and you try to animate it, you're just going to have a lot of problems. And that's like the first thing I look for when I see that someone's having issues with animating something, is it converted to a symbol? Let's say that, so we'll get back to that. Here's where you can pick your type of symbol. You can also name your symbol a certain instance name. The reason why you would do that is when you start getting into coding and start naming, creating buttons out of your symbols. So it's a good practice to get into just naming it, and it's really simple to do. So just name it something very simple. Actually, maybe blue circle is even too detailed. I'll just call it a circle. And then under type, I'll typically pick a movie clip. Movie clips are unique because you can actually nest an animation within an animation. And that's a little bit more complex, but essentially what that means is that I can have this circle have a separate timeline within the main timeline. So if you think about it, you can have multiple levels of timelines within objects themselves on the path. The reason why you might want to do that is maybe you want or like a rollover property of this button to where when I roll over it, it starts animating in and of itself without affecting any other of the pieces on the board. So just I'm going to select movie clip, and I'm going to hit OK. Again, I'm still on frame 1 on layer 1 here, and I'm just going to actually go over to frame 30. And I'm going to control click that, and I'm going to hit insert keyframe. So what insert keyframe does is it takes an exact copy of the frame that I had prior, frame 1, and then I have, and it's going to really just copy it onto frame 30. It's going to copy the exact same thing. The reason why you would want to do that is what we're doing is defining a beginning of the animation and the end of the animation. And then we're going to tell Animate to fill in the gaps for us. So back in the old days, does anyone know how they created cartoons when Walt Disney was around? So like it's essentially like a flip book. Yeah. Yeah, so like they'll define like the so like so like they would way back when probably just they'd create a storyboard, like six squares, right? And then they'd like pick pitch it to the client probably, and they say, oh, you know, my animation is going to start with a little stick man, you know, walking down the road, and he's like walking towards a house, and eventually he gets to the house, you know, or something, and then he's like, he knocks on the door, and then the camera pans in, right, and then, you know, he's in front of the house, and someone, you know, pops open the door, or whatever. You know, like that's my story, right? And so what we're doing here is exactly kind of the same thing. We're saying, okay, we're starting with the ball here, and then we know that at frame 30, we want the ball to be somewhere else, right? Like we want to bounce or whatever. And then maybe once it reaches that destination, like maybe the ball like ends up going up here or something. It kind of moves up here on the screen, and then eventually it'll just move off the canvas or something like that. It'll be gone. So way back when they would have like the main art director or whatever would define these different scenes and say, okay, this is what's going to happen through the whole thing, and then their team would like build out all these different main frames, and then they get a bunch of other production artists too, who understood how to generate all of the artwork very much the same, create all of the in-between frames between this and that. So Tween comes from basically Animate. They call them classic tweens, which are like just in-between animations. And what Animate does is it's going to fill those in for you. So this person here who designs, you know, this screen is going to actually show, you know, this guy over here. He's going to start walking. You know, he's going to have his leg out, and it's going to like do all of the in-between motions of him walking to this destination to reach this screen. So, and then so on and so forth. This person would do that. This person would do that. And then these are kind of like the frames per second that we were talking about up there. So when I define frames per second, I'm defining this is 5 frames, and let's say we wanted him to go from here to here in 1 second. That would be five frames, which would be super fast. Walking within a second, it would be hard to watch because it's super fast. So the more frames between here, the more, the smoother it's going to be. Of course, it's going to extend the smoothness of the animation. But that's essentially the concept of what the software simplifies this process. We're defining the beginning, the end, and then maybe the beginning, middle, end, or maybe the beginning, middle, end. Whatever we want it to do, we're defining those big major toll gates within the story that we want to have happen. So that's essentially like the gist of it, and so on and so forth. So all these folks will be drawing all this stuff individually, and we're just going to have the software draw all of those using tweens. Did everybody kind of get what like a tween is? It's essentially the gist of it. The tween is like the in-between slides that we would otherwise have to draw. The tweens are going to build themselves here in this situation. So on my storyboard here, I'm on frame 1. So here's how I can just kind of navigate the timeline. If I click on this playhead here, this red line, what we call the playhead, on frame 1, I can define where I want the ball to start on frame 1. And I can also go to frame 30 and define where I want the ball to end on frame 30. So I'm going to go to frame 1. I'm going to grab this ball. I'm just going to kind of put it in the corner. I'll zoom out a little bit. Kind of losing it. a little bit. And then I'll click on frame 30 and I'll move see how like it moved, the position's different? That's because when I made the keyframe on frame 30, that's where the ball started. So I'm going to go back to frame 30 and I can just move this anytime. I can move it here. That's the beginning and this is the end. So what I would do is say, okay, now I want to create those tweens or the in-between slides between frame 1 and frame 30. So I'd come in this timeline here, and I don't have to be in the beginning or the end, but what I would do is click on somewhere in the between these two frames, and then I would control click that area, and then I would go and select create classic tween. And then so in the timeline here, it creates this like, and you can't even see it on this projector, which is totally horrible. But I'll show you what it looks like. So whenever you have like a tween that's been properly created in the timeline, it's actually just going to be, and I'll just put draw on the timeline here. You're going to see a arrow between the two frames that you created the tweens for. So that's what you're not seeing up there. But again, to do that is very simply create a beginning point, create an end point in the timeline slides, a start and a finish, and control click the gap between the two frames that you created in your timeline, and hit create classic tween. And now when I drag my playhead here, I can see that it's drawn all of the frames needed to make it go from point A to point B visually for us. One quick shortcut on Animate is to, oh, that's my mom. It's my birthday, so I'm going to get a lot of texts and stuff. So what you can do is just hit enter, and that will play the playhead automatically throughout. It'll go from start to finish, and it'll just stop at the end. Just play enter over and over again to stop and pause it. This helps a lot. So it's actually going to show it in real time what it actually looks like. Pretty much that's it. So how do we make something more interesting? Well, you can literally you can adjust the end where you want to end up on the frames to make the animation more interesting. So if we wanted the ball to start at a smaller size, let's say, I would click it. Let's see, I could actually drag these position and size scales here under properties. So whatever I'm clicking on the stage will give me different properties here. So when I had nothing clicked out here on the stage, my properties palette was simply change the size of the canvas, pick what frame, how many frames per second you want the animation to be. But now I'm clicking on a shape, and it's giving me these other options. So I'm going to start small to large. So just to do that, I went to the smallest frame, frame 1. Not smallest, the first frame, frame 1. I clicked on the object, and I just changed the size of it, and then it gave me a different, perspective. So what's good about this kind of concept is you can take this concept and put it towards, think about like a JPEG that you could put that towards. Maybe you could put that towards a piece of popcorn or something that's flying in your face from far away. Maybe, so if I went to frame 30 and I was to move this over here, it's actually, now it's not really traveling across and growing, it's coming towards me like, it's like punching me in the face or something like that. It's a baseball getting pitched at you or whatever. So it's a basic concept, but it's kind of multifaceted where you can take that idea and apply it to other things. Look how slow that is. Well, how do we speed that up? I mean, because this doesn't look like a baseball that's going fast. Well, if we reduce the amount of frames between frame 1 and frame 2, then you can really speed it up. So let me just reduce the amount here. Oop. We gotta shift click and remove them. So it's a little bit faster. I probably want it a lot faster eventually, but that's kind of the idea. Like, so you can adjust the speed just by this playhead shrinking and growing, growing for more time, and then shrinking for a less quicker kind of reaction. You know, say I wanted it to end up being a lot larger than it actually is. Again, I'll just make this larger here, and then just replay it like so. What else can you do? So, okay, you can apply different color effects. So I wanted to change the color of this object from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation. You could simply, again, click on the object under Properties, the color effect, under Style. You can actually change the tint of the color. So if you select Tint, I can click on any kind of one of these colors and have my colors end up that way. So now it's going to go from like a very subtle blue to a purple change. You want to make it more drastic you can. Oh, something more obvious, red. Now actually, my saturation must not be, oh, my tint isn't up 100%, so I can just create, you know, overlay a tint of this red color over it. So if it's too strong that way, I can adjust the tint that way, just by this slider, this tint slider. It's very similar to hue and saturation within Photoshop. If you think about tint almost being equivalent to saturation within the hue saturation palette in Photoshop, that would be probably a reasonable relationship between those two. Again, we talked about alpha as well. So let's say I want to go to this little blue circle and I want to adjust the alpha, meaning the transparency of this object. I can make it go from 100% transparent to 0%. Basically, 0% alpha is complete transparency, and 100% alpha is complete opacity. So, and then that again, you know, can work into your animation as well. And then, very simply, if you wanted this to do something else from this point in time, you would just create a new keyframe. So what I did was I hit frame 60, I created a new keyframe, and then again, at this point, at frame 30, between frame 30 and frame 60, I can define a new animation by going to frame 60, clicking on the object there, moving it to a different location, maybe even just changing the size of it. So I'll just change the size of it for the sake of demonstration. And move it a little bit too. And maybe like change its color. Just do everything across the board we can. And then see again, so here's between frame 30 to frame 60. This is the beginning and this is the end. So I'll just click in this center point area between these two keyframes. And then I'll hit Control, I'll hold Control and hit click there, and then I'll just create a classic tween, and then that'll fill in all of the gaps for that animation too. So now we kind of have a bounce there. And then so on and so forth. You can, you know, kind of that's essentially the basics of animation and how it works. There are some other little kind of things you can do to make the animations more believable. And let me just see here. So this ease property, you can get to that by clicking on a keyframe. The difference between a keyframe and a regular frame, that's probably something important that I should explain. So a keyframe is actually a frame that has this little dot symbol in it. And it's really hard to see on this projector. Oh, sorry. I didn't ruin any of your stuff. Hold on a second. Well, keep in mind that I've actually been talking to some of the program coordinators about a lot of the professors actually have been talking about having charging units at each of the tables rather than having people scroll across the floor. It's like really dangerous. Okay, so the difference between a regular frame and a keyframe, right? So what it's going to look like on the interface is basically a keyframe is a frame that has like this dot in it. An empty frame is not going to have a dot in it at the timeline. It's just going to look like that, really. What the dot really means is that there's a piece of artwork on the canvas on that layer at that point in time or frame, that frame in time. So frame 1 has artwork on it within the timeline. In this case, frame 2 does not. So if I drag my playhead, from here to here, I'm going to have an image. And if I drag it, I'm going to have an image showing for this frame on my canvas board, and I'm going to have no images at all. It's just going to disappear like it was doing before I was just dragging my playhead back. So when in doubt, just look at the timeline if you're not sure as to whether or not what layer a piece of artwork is being shown on, or if you can put a piece of artwork on a certain layer. So clicking on this keyframe, then you can see that I have artwork and it's different up there, and it's changed. These frames, of course, with this little arrow going through it, which you can't hardly see, but you will in the video later, have tweens in there. So a tween is different from a frame. I can't select an object on a tween layer, but I can on the keyframe layer. So I can select it. I can't. This is a tween. This is basically like a generated artwork based on what the beginning and the end is defining in this animation. So to kind of make this maybe more believable as far as it's floating around this canvas here, I'm going to click on this keyframe and then hit Control-click onto it. Actually, no, I'm just going to click on it, and in my Properties palette, I can adjust this easing property. And easing will kind of slow the frame, it'll kind of give the image of the object slowing down or speeding up as it approaches or moves away from a keyframe as it's going along the timeline. So I'm going to set it to 0 and kind of show you what it kind of looks like. I'm going to actually make this 100% in the alpha so we can see it. So here's kind of regular speed. It's very kind of just not very, there's no like gravity to it, if you will. So if I kind of ease out, this is going to show this object kind of moving away. So it's kind of moving, it's kind of slowing down as it gets towards the end, and it moves a little bit faster as it gets past this frame 30 point. So it's almost like, it almost gives the illusion of like a car going from 0 to 60 or something like that, or that it kind of mimics that kind of momentum with that ease property. And then just by opposite here, easing in will kind of slow it down towards the end. It actually looked like it sped it up. Oh, that's right. Let me. There we go. So it kind of speeds up and then it kind of slows down at the end. In the beginning, and then it'll slow at the end. Let's see. What else? I'm gonna do a new layer. I'm gonna show you what I didn't show you earlier, and that was the shape tweens. So the way we got this ball to move across the screen, to kind of expand and contract, to kind of ease in and ease out, to these different keyframes that we've defined, i.e. Move faster towards the keyframe or move slower towards the keyframe that it's approaching within the timeline, was based on artwork that was drawn out and converted to a movie clip symbol. You can actually animate objects that are not movie clip symbols. Let me click. But the problem with that is that you don't have very much control over what happens with those animations. And so you'll see, I'm just very simply going to draw a shape. You can see in the timeline here at the bottom that I have my keyframe defined, and it's actually the same throughout between frame 1 and frame 60. The reason why it built all 60 frames for me with the same piece of artwork that you can see on the board here is that I have another layer that has 60 that spans across 60 frames. So if this was to span across 85 frames, and I was to create a new layer, and I was to draw, let me just copy and paste this object to this layer. You can see that it's gonna expand all these different layers, so to all the way to layer 80, or I'm sorry, frame 85. This might come into handy understanding this when you get further down the road and you have an animation that has many layers, and you're creating a layer, a new layer in your animation, and you're like, oh wait, that's not supposed to be at the end of my animation. I want this to be at the beginning of my animation. But you're gonna, you might run into those issues, and the way to solve that would be click on the frames that you want to remove, and essentially this is very similar to clicking multiple objects within Illustrator or something. You would click a frame here, hold Shift, and click a frame there at the end of the timeline, and then you would Control click and then hit Remove Frames. So that's how to kind of cut your animation, your frame by frame animation down in this software. So I have a shape here. I've not really messed with it. I've not converted it into a symbol at all. Let me actually click a blank area of the space down here in the timeline, hold Control and hit Insert Keyframe. So now I'll have another instance of it. Instance is a word used to describe objects on within Animate 2, and actually the software refers to them as instances. So it's just something to keep track of or be aware of, that kind of verbiage kind of comes up later on and stuff as you're working with the software. So I have my little clay pentagon, I guess it is. I'm going to draw another shape over it. If you notice, I'm at this frame 65, my second keyframe that I created here. At frame 65, I'm actually going to draw out sort of like just a circle. I'm going to encompass it and make this like odd shape. I'm going to make like another shape here too. So I've overlapped all of these. Even if I had a different color, it would still overlap, because if you can see, like, I can double click this shape and now it's all like one piece. It's not like Illustrator to where it's like all these separate shapes overlapping each other. It's all one shape now, so it's very clay-like when you're messing with this. If I take my sub-selection tool here, you can even see that my this corner of my box is not maintained. The other pieces of my circle are not maintained. It's not overlapping shapes. It's now all one shape. So be careful as you're drawing stuff out in this and creating shapes, because they're a lot different. So I'm going to bring this over here. So I'm just cleaning up my timeline here for a second. So what other kind of tween animation can you do with just these basic drawing shapes? The only other one you can really do is if you control click the area between your two keyframes here, your beginning and your end, is you can create a shape tween. And that is really just it's a crapshoot, basically. Like, and that one's really slow, so I'm going to tighten it up a little bit. It really is a crapshoot as to what happens with it. You're really just defining your beginning and your end, and you're letting the software kind of fill in the gaps. And you literally have no control over this whatsoever. So this is just a very organic, whatever happens with this type of animation, which is something that I never use. But that's not to say that you couldn't get some kind of benefit out of it if your style of project called for it. It's there should you want to use it. I'll change the color of this end piece, and the color property still applies, so I can just apply a different color to the end keyframe for my shape tween, and then the beginning if I wanted to. Maybe something's there, but it's not something I'll use hardly very much at all. Let's see what else. How about we take a break and then go from there? Does anyone have questions on this so far?